followed M0A.com for any amount of time, you know that good landings start in the traffic pattern. In fact, if you've read our book, The Secret to Perfect Landings, if you haven't got a copy, I encourage you to go to the groundschoolacademy.com store and grab a copy. Because one of the big things that we talk about in there is a perfect landing starts with a perfect traffic pattern. Let's talk about that for a moment. What is a perfect traffic pattern? Okay, we see this beautiful rectangle, but how do I know I'm flying that appropriate rectangle? How do I have those appropriate cues so I know when to turn crosswind, when to turn downwind, base, final, those sort of things? How do I have a traffic pattern that stays the same each and every time? That's what we're looking for. How can I expect to have a perfect landing when my traffic pattern is different every time? I'm high on downwind this time, I'm low on downwind the next time. I turn my base late, I turn my base early 2 different times. The landing is different every time, and thus I get a different result. If I can fly that perfect traffic pattern, I'm on my way to making that perfect landing, because every landing starts to look the same. Let's assume we're looking at this diagram here. We're making left traffic for runway 27. Let's assume we're down at sea level, and I just take off and I need to turn left crosswind. Well, the AIM suggests that you turn crosswind 300 feet from traffic pattern altitude. So again, assuming I took off at sea level, I would turn left crosswind at 700 feet. I'd still continue to climb. I would mindfully consider that, okay, now the wind is from my right and it's pushing me back towards that runway. So maybe flying a 90-degree heading off that runway may not work. I need to crab into that wind just a little bit so I can get that appropriate rectangular ground track is what I'm searching for. I then turn my downwind shortly before reaching traffic pattern altitude. In fact, usually about 50 feet from TPA, traffic pattern altitude, do I turn that downwind. Usual traffic pattern is 1,000 feet AGL, so at 950 feet, I would start that turn. I would lower that nose. I'd bring that throttle back, and I would turn to what heading? Well, I would turn to that 090 heading. Why? Well, I just took off 27. 180 degrees puts me on the 090 heading as I parallel that runway. Now, as I parallel that runway, though, it's important to ask myself a question. Am I creeping into that runway? Am I creeping a little bit further from that runway? You can fly that perfect 090, that perfect parallel, but if you have a slight crosswind from the left or the right, it can be blowing you closer to that runway, blowing you further away from that runway. So when I get to this midfield point and I'm holding my traffic pattern altitude perfectly, I've got my airspeed in check, I'm not too fast, I'm not too slow, I'm looking out that side and saying, okay, is that runway getting bigger? Is that runway getting smaller? Is that sight picture where I want it? I use things like the wing strut. I want to keep that runway on this part of the wing strut. Or in a low wing plane, I want to keep that part of the wing on the runway there so I can better judge distance from that actual runway. Fly a straight downwind, please, and keep in mind what the wind is actually doing. Now, when do I turn my base? We're taught to turn our base when we get to a 45-degree point off our touchdown point. Here's what I mean by that now. Let's say my touchdown point is the numbers 27. I get to beam my touchdown point, I start my procedure, and my airplane's carb heat, power back slightly to about 1,700 RPMs, 10 degrees of flaps, and I start my descent. When that touchdown point gets to a 45-degree point off my shoulder, then I turn my base. So I'm watching for that. I see that 45-degree point, and then I turn my base. I keep my descent going. I work in more flaps, but not in a turn. Wait till I'm wings level on the base, and continue to keep flying down that base. And then lastly, when do I turn final? And this is critical because you don't want to turn too early and skid through the turn. You don't want to turn too late and slip through final. You want to make a nice standard rate turn and roll out perfectly on final. And trust me, your first few traffic patterns are going to be far from perfect. You're going to roll out well before final, you're going to roll out well after final, and that's where people get themselves in trouble. Just keep that in mind. It's those who go through final and try to make a steep turn back around to make final that get themselves in trouble. You can go around at any point in the traffic pattern. And if you were ever going to do a go around, that's a great situation to do it in. Say, listen, I'm not comfortable exceeding standard rate in the traffic pattern. I'm going around. And you can go around on that base and take that action. A perfect landing starts with a perfect traffic pattern. Here's your homework on this lesson. I want you to go out to your driveway, go out to your yard, whatever, backyard, whatever it takes, whatever your spouse will let you do. I want you to take some chalk on that driveway and draw a runway. Or go out to the backyard with some spray paint and spray paint a runway. And I want you to walk your traffic pattern. Literally walk down this fictitious runway you made. Practice the radio call. Say, okay, at 700 feet, I'm literally turn the crosswind. Practice that radio call. Watch my altimeter, watch my airspeed. Fly the downwind and chair fly, but literally walk the traffic pattern in your backyard or in your driveway. Your neighbors will think you're crazy, but I promise you, you're going to save a ton of time and a ton of money by doing this and working through your traffic pattern and working through your radio calls. Go take action on your homework, and I'll see you in the next lesson. See ya.